Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Dr. Brands, in your book, I'm really interested in your the Danger Zone book, and how you balance. In trying to understand the Chinese perspective, they certainly view themselves as a 5,000-year-old civilization, the Middle Kingdom, who the last 200 years has been an aberration and a humiliation in their view. They're not going to let that happen again. They have a longer view, all those sorts of things that are kind of baked in to the understanding of their mentality and how they're on the march now in a very real way, and probably more than people think. Their shipbuilding capacity alone is striking, and I'm not sure many people in the general public understand that. They have a bigger Navy, not a better Navy, but a bigger Navy. How do you balance, so that longer view, and then you write about the 2020s being absolutely critical, which is a very short-term issue in setting the stage for this longer great powers competition. You've got the demographic cliff that they're facing. They're no longer publishing a lot of economic data. Their youth unemployment, which I think drives, GDP is really important to us. I think unemployment for the Chinese is most important for a variety of reasons. When you're an authoritarian regime, a lot of young men not working is a real problem. So how do you balance this, in your view, of how they view where they're at right now? And of course, you've got this big Taiwan question. Where they're at right now, because do they view that as, in your estimation, as a reason to go quicker? Or do they fall back to the traditional view of the longer term strategy?
Senator, my view, and this is by no means a unanimous view among China watchers, I should add, but my view is that China is being motivated by a dangerous mixture of weakness, strength, and personalization at this point. The weakness comes from the demographic and economic problems that you noted, which are already having a pronounced effect on Chinese growth, and that effect will only become more pronounced over time. At the same time, the military modernization program is still going gangbusters if you look at the increases in military spending. And so you have a country whose long-term economic prospects are dimming as its near-term military position becomes stronger. Historically, that has been a recipe for trouble, because that's exactly the sort of combination that tempts countries to use force sooner rather than later to lock in advantages while they still can. It's reinforced in this case because China's fortunes have become increasingly entangled with Xi Jinping's fortunes as he personalizes the political system and does away with this system of something closer to collective rule that China had for a couple of generations after Mao Zedong. And so you sometimes hear Xi Jinping say things like, the question of Taiwan cannot be passed down from generation to generation. That is sometimes read as him saying it cannot be passed down to the next generation of Chinese leaders. And so when you put all of those things together, it makes me worry that we may be dealing with a China that's in a bit of a hurry by the time we get to the latter part of this decade.
And he's already in an unprecedented third term.
With no indication that he's planning on stepping down.
Correct. And so if you're a betting man, if you had to place a wager, red he goes, black he doesn't go, where are you betting?
I think an operation against Taiwan would be sufficiently daunting that there are lots of things the U.S., Taiwan, and other countries in the region can do to drive down the chances of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. But on the current trajectory, I'm very worried about where we're up.
And then one last question about the CCP and China. So there's always been this sort of natural distrust between them and Russia, or the USSR, or the Russian Empire, however you want to, whatever phase Russia's in. How do you view that? Even though they seem to be working more collaboratively than they have in recent memory, there's still this natural tension. They share a border. How do you gauge the reality of that relationship right now?
The historic mistrust is still there. In fact, China will occasionally print maps that show it controlling parts of Russia as it is currently constituted. And certainly, I think the Russians in particular know that if China comes anywhere close to achieving its ambitions in Eurasia, that's going to be a very challenging situation for Russia itself. The challenge is that those concerns are rather distant at the moment. Ideologically, these are two countries. They're both autocratic powers trying to make it in a world dominated by a democratic superpower. They both view the United States and its allies as their primary enemies. And by all indications, Xi and Putin seem to have similar worldviews and get along fairly well. So those historic tensions may reassert themselves, but perhaps not on a timeline that would help us in this decade or a little bit beyond.
So maybe the United States exploiting some of those traditional differences as opposed to driving them together probably makes most sense for us, right?
It could. I'll spare you a long excursion into history, but if you look back at the prior Sino-Soviet relationship, the U.S. actually pursued a strategy in the 50s of trying to drive them closer together as a way of exploiting those frictions within the relationship, and I would argue that it worked fairly well at the time.
Okay, thank you.